with me. Well, I'm ringing on a baby bumblebee. Whoops, it bit me. Yeah, and Michael, what were you talking about?
Well, we agree with him, number one. We feel that one of the roles of public education is provide a sort of holistic education, not what we are necessarily focused on the academics, even though it is. We talked about the fact that depending on your family and its resources, or societal organizations you belong to, like your church or whatever, your children may have some options to grow in those other ways that they wouldn't have otherwise, especially if they're in especially in public school where those options aren't great. Again, it's the accident of birth situation. So I think we agree. We felt it was important that public education spend more time with the creative arts and other ways, and understand better how children learn just through the academic life.
And we also talked about the national and international studies like PISA that put us way down, and then we get all upset because we're ranked 24th in the world in terms of academics. But then we look at the other side of things. If we were coming from China, where do the children want to come? They want to come to the United States. So what is it they're lacking when they come here? Creativity. Where are they learning it? Here. We've got to be doing something right with that creativity. We need to maybe expand on it and do more.
Did you think of any implications for the commission?
We did.
Would you like to share those?
Sure. The thing that we hoped is that in this process we could find at least one thing that we could come to terms with as a full group and move forward with. We didn't say what it should be, although we did have some ideas. But that's what we had hoped that we could find. And we also wonder, why are we here only till noontime when my whole day is shot by the fact that I'm here? So why can't I stay till 3 and get something accomplished?
We have within the group the authority and, I hate to say power, but if you want to do 6 hours or you want to do 12 hours, I'm available. So I was given the dates and the times, and I already locked up. I have to change one of the dates. But if you want to do full days, or what approaches a full day, we certainly have that within our sphere of control. So why don't we revisit that, that notion of more than 3 hours. We need to move the meeting around the state, so I'm sensitive to that, but I'm not in any way inhibited as far as expanding the hours. Bill, Eric, any thoughts from your group, what you talked about?
Well, I thought the purpose of the video was to get us to find our own creativity, think outside of our own paradigm. I think that was the purpose of it, and that was thought an effective way to do that. I think it's hard to argue with the proposition about the development of creativity and the human spirit and what that does at a young age. I think its implications for the K-12 segment of our work. We will look at, I think the overarching implications for our work is we're here because of money. We're here because how much money is raised locally and how much money is raised in the state to support public education broadly defined. And in my own work that I do with community colleges and the work that we do looking at the demographic shifts that we have in our state, both with regards to the shifts in the population and the shifts in the wealth, and the shifts in the industrial base and the effects on workforce demand. It is timely to pull back and look at how we are investing in K through 20 so that we can child, I'm not a K-12 expert, so I wouldn't pretend to be, but as a parent, hopefully a thoughtful observer of the community, I would say that that's an extremely important proposition. It's part of the curriculum that K-12 is providing. How that competes, the argument that I would take that he was making was that arts are almost the first thing to get cuts in budgets, and that we should think very carefully about that. Those who are in K-12 positions should think very carefully about that. Those are never easy choices. As a child moves up the educational rung, they begin to reach an age where they have the capacity to make choice, where choice is, and as do their parents, if they're fortunate enough to have parents who are engaged in a family raising that child, about where it is they want to go with their lives. And at that point, my view would be is that the government would have a response. I thought it was interesting that you talked for 19 minutes, 21 seconds, but you didn't use the word opportunity, because I thought that is probably the end goal of education is opportunity, and it's choice, and it's really plural, it's opportunities and several. And so you could pick the grade. I mean, maybe it's 10, maybe it's 11, maybe it's 4th grade, maybe but it's certainly senior year in high school where an individual makes a choice about the education that if they're situated to be able to pursue, they have an opportunity to pursue. And so they may look to go to pursue something in the arts or in the thoughtfulness of a university environment, or they may be more occupational and trade oriented, in which case they would come to a community college. And at that point, the government would have, I think, a moral responsibility to provide meaningful opportunities for both of those individuals to make those choices. And then within that structure, each of the systems have the resources to be able to meet those demographic needs, so that the students, as they are, so many of them in our system are poor, and they need the financial assistance to be able to attend, and they need tuition to be low, and they need the degree period to be 2 years or less, so that they can get into the workforce. 36% of our students, 17,000 students, work more than 30 hours a week while they're going to school. We have designed a curriculum and structure and access that enables them so that education can fulfill their economic promise. If they come from an orientation where they don't have those immediate pressures and can pursue some of the educational opportunities that are available in the university system, then the moral obligation of the government to provide a meaningful opportunity of access to that avenue, I think, is implicated by our work.
One of the parts of the elegance of the statute in this commission is that it's P316, K through 16, or early childhood through 16, depending on how you want to read it. And that's one of the things that I'm very excited about, is that you can look at it from your perch, from your viewpoint, but also touch on other parts of the system. Did you come up with anything, Bill, did you want to add to what Derek is saying?
I agree with what Derek says. I think this pivots. When do you pivot from very broad education to deeper learning? And I think that one of the things we're really focusing on is expose kids to all of the different standards and how important they all are. But at some point, you also need to pivot to master something. Another issue is the whole issue of the balance between equity and freedom, or choice, or whatever. In other words, you're trying very hard to expose kids that might not have had opportunities, say, for art, music in their homes and stuff. So exposing them, but at some point, how do you cause that pivot to go on? Does it happen in grade school? Does it happen in junior high? And I think because of our mutual interest in the career education, when do you start bringing in that career exposure so that the end isn't just a general education, it's a purposeful education? And we talked about when does that transition go on in career and technical education. I think one of the things I'd like to see come out of this is really try to see how does career education fit in to our main learning results, in our proficiency-based learning and diplomas, and the whole nature, the structure of what we consider what the person needs to graduate from high school or public institution.
So both dyads have come up with something that could be in a report, could be a recommendation in a report from the commission that would require further study or require further work. But both groups
came up with sort of several strands. One was the impact of socioeconomics and community health on learning is significant, and the resources to address those issues is sparse, making it very difficult to counter that inequity. We talked about the importance of visual and performing arts, but also that it's about student engagement as much as it is about the arts. That if students are engaged in the activity that they are participating in, then they're more likely to learn better. Whether that engagement is working with a local machine company and making a tool die form through computer programming, or whether it's through dance or movement. The students who are learning best that way are able to see that practical application of what it is they're learning. We also talked about the problems that we have now with the terms of accountability and how that's being used as leverage for change, and it's actually more punitive leverage for change. But the emphasis on testing counters the necessity of failure in learning. So if you can't fail, then you're not going to emphasize that creative portion. And we have only just gotten to the implications on the commission, but perhaps my counterpart will be able to add to that. I can't.
Well, one link that I do see between the socioeconomic effects and how to sort of address those within the context of the commission is taking a look at the funding around early childhood programs and learning. We certainly have seen multitudinous of research that have shown those are critical years. The more that we can do to make sure that all kids are getting positive, healthy experiences and environments will mitigate the necessity for any sort of extra work and costs that the schools face going down the road. And then the only thing I would just like to comment on in terms of the focus on career and technology education is one of the things that I really heard Sir Robinson say was, we don't know what 20 years is going to look like. We don't know what skills, specific technical skills are going to be required. But I think we do know, we all, at least we're starting to hear some agreement that creativity is indeed important. And that very well could be what will help our economy thrive and succeed, is if we can create environments where more of our children and therefore our adults feel empowered to be creative. There are certainly some pretty scary books out there about the automation of our jobs in factories, and that what we are doing currently in the educational system is definitely not addressing what's coming on a high-speed train toward us. So I hope that we can, and I think some of the higher ed institutions are starting to recognize that. I'm starting to see programs that are addressing cross-pollination, connections, whatever they're calling it, where students are required, not just encouraged, but are required to take topics from across all disciplines in order to engage their full intellectual abilities in life.
So the opportunities that we have in CTE are very much in front of us as far as did you, Reggie?
Oh, I'm talking.
Oh, okay. That was not Mr. Hassan. It's just Bob. I thought Mr. Sigley wanted to say something before I died. So CTE is right in front of us. There's some things that we know that some students would benefit from a re-envisioned or reinvigorated CTE program. There's resources to do, et cetera. But what about that notion that we don't know how many careers kids are going to have? What are the things that we know that kids are going to need, no matter how many careers they have? So you've got another one that could be used, for the commission as a whole to look at, to include in their report for, I wonder if, those types of things. Thank you for doing that. All right, up Karen's in.
Sure. We also talked about that idea of plan talked about the obligation in honoring the whole child in education and any kind of educational reform. We also discussed that idea of balancing the creative and literate side of students and looking at, what we're offering and seeing if there's any kind of balance there.
Karen, can you say that one more time?
Sure, balancing the creative and the literacy side of students and making sure that we do have a balance. We talked about parental engagement, the story of the dancer. Obviously, she had to have a parent that then would take her to the dance classes, so that piece. And finally, that idea of being comfortable with mistakes, and whether that's in a classroom setting where kids are encouraged to make mistakes and see that as a way to grow, but also in the adult world of our work, that we think outside the box and are comfortable with trying something and not immediately saying it's not working. Because in my opinion, sometimes we do that in education. We don't give it enough time to actually grow and take root and make changes. Is anything else?
I think you covered that.
Excellent. The notion back to what Bill was talking about between creativity and freedom, or equity and freedom, that's an important notion that we have to really grapple with. We have a lot of services that are available to some people in the state. For example, prenatal through age 5, I'm particularly interested in what they know and what gets passed on to the rest of us. What do we have for predictive value? What do we have for intervention value? What do we have for just sharing that information, but also not sharing it as the government or sharing it in any inappropriate way, but advantaging kids and families towards what they possibly could make as a choice in the future, whether it be at grade 4 or age 10, or whether it be at middle level, or whether it be someplace even further beyond it. Those are important notions that we really need to think about as we come up with our big ideas. Mike and Rob, I'm sorry, Mike and Sarah, please. Sorry.
Down there.
I was looking at Rob.
Sure. I'll start. So, Mike and I touched a little bit on just where we were coming from and talking about these issues, both as being married to an educator, being a parent of public school kids right now, and the work that we do in the legislature as Republicans and Democrats. I think one of the things that we were most struck by was what Sir Robinson said about 2065 and trying to educate kids for the future, and the real question of how you do that, and the fact that that has always been a challenge. It's a challenge now, and it seems like more of a challenge now because we live in such a quickly changing world technology-wise, but really the fundamental challenge has always been the same, that you do need to teach certain things, but what you really need underlying is the ability to problem solve and the ability to constantly use that creativity that everyone around the table has been talking about to do that. So we really, I think, wanted to probe a little bit more on that. I would say the other thing that really struck us that we were talking about is just in a state like Maine, where you have this real difference between rural school districts and some of our urban areas or more populated areas, that we often talk about the K through 12 education and how different it is in these different school districts, and yet haven't really found a way outside of the EPS formula to affect that and to change it for the better, and what sort of support is needed beyond just funding in order to sort of help those districts as well.
I'll just add a few things to that. Practice as well. We also have a variety of kids, and our kids have different experiences, so that was an interesting thing for us. One thing I think we talked about was, maybe this is something for more discussion, is actually needing to have a definition of what we're trying to do. And I wonder if we misunderstood, and I think that's for children educating people, perhaps also in terms of what we're going to go spend all this money we both found that the story about the dancer, where, you know, she was just trouble in school, they found her niche, she succeeded, and then that flip comment at the end, if it was a kid today perhaps, they just medicated her. And that to me is a really powerful story. Sarah mentioned the barriers of testing. Testing just gets in the way of so much what we're trying to do. And I just, as an aside, I mentioned to her afterwards, actually, there's a gentleman named Mike Rowe, you probably know him, he was a TV show Dirty Jobs guy. And if you go on Facebook, he's a very big advocate of trades and of education for kids. And he's really funny too, but it's a really good resource on Facebook. He's always adding things in, and it's just really provocative stuff, so. That's it.
Yeah, he is good.
Yeah.
Very good. So that what Sarah was talking about was that maybe there's some sort of structural piece, you know, that we need to really think about as far as the equity piece and making programs and activities and resources available across a rural / suburban / urban situation. Maybe there's something that's out there that we can do.
Well, I think that ties into, I mentioned defining what we're trying to do. Our schools do so much now. They've become such a big hub of society. And we get upset that they don't educate the kids, but they're doing so many other things. So I think, yeah, we really done on schools as a society.
So Dr. Rob,
Well,
so you both had an intersection, you both said to each other, now you go.
no, we discussed resources with a vocational person, you know, the stuff. I just teach little kids and I kind of know my stuff. But I think one thing I think this whole community is in agreement on is that we need to provide vocational education at an earlier age for students. To provide not just vocational education, but provide more pathways for students. Some students don't fit into a regular classroom, and more all the time. And we need to recognize that and find policies and programs that will do that. I think also we need to really have a deal with explosive children in our classroom. That has become a rather recent phenomenon where we have children coming in and flipping desks and destroying the atmosphere of everybody else around. That is something that really needs to be dealt with. And in a practical sense, there is a tremendous disparity in the state of Maine with teachers' salaries. And the best and the brightest, you know, teachers are human beings. Most of them will go where the salary is more. So it's essential, I think, for the future of our state to have a statewide collective bargaining program to even that out. A lot of people disagree with that, but I think it's a real necessity. I think that's the only way to do that. Either that or set up some incentive pay for teachers that's tied with testing for the rural areas where the teacher pay isn't as much as it is in other places. And looking at this presentation was very good, but we would have to, in order to have a situation like he's describing, we would have to tear down our schools and rebuild them from the beginning up through. Because our schools are kind of set up this way. You have a classroom with 25 or more second graders in it. You can't meet the needs of every child in that classroom. You just can't. It's not even humanly possible. So we need to have mandated smaller class sizes, at least pre-K2. And with our pre-K, everybody agrees that that's important, but that's a situation you just don't throw money at. You need to have well-defined programs. What are we going to do in our preschool? We're not just going to take a bunch of 3 or 4-year-olds and throw them in a room and see what happens. We need to have a real set curriculum, behavior standards, things like this, where we can deal with these kids. And it brings back to the explosive kids, that the earlier you get them, the better your chances are of fixing them. If you've got a child that's 8 years old and is still being explosive, the chance of fixing that child or getting that child around again decreases as they get older. And just finding ways to fund things like this and make them good solid programs.
I think, yeah, we spoke about many of the same things, equity and access, with the attention in terms of funding formula, making sure I also think, you know, just, I've heard it echoed around the table, the opportunity that exists, with this commission to, given the representation that we see here, for, to create some sort of alignments that allow us to have second grade teacher talking to a high school administrator, you know, having the chancellor of our university, community college teacher. I think there's a unique opportunity that allows us to think about, how do we create those pathways, what gets included, and what leverage points we have, with it, so we don't need to replicate some of the strengths and you know, things that we can do, at one place that we don't necessarily need to do in every place. So, I think that covered, a big part of our process.
So I saw one of those factoids that kind of goes by your face every so often with me. It's frequently, and I forget where I saw it, which is also frequent for me. But that Maine has the highest number of students that are expelled from preschool in the country. And I have a lot of wonders about that. And recently had an experience that one of our grandchildren experienced a preschool, and the response to some of his behaviors and ideas about what it's like to be in a preschool were not embraced, and how the adults react to that.
I think that's legitimate. We're looking at, you know, we need to recognize that we're a school, we're not a hospital. And for these children that are emotionally disturbed at a young age, we really need to find some meaningful type of program that will work for these children. And as a public school, I think it's designed right now, it's not that way.
Right, so there may be some pushback on definitions around hospital and school, and certainly I would approach the notion, and this was something when I was working in a district, was, is it the student that gets ready for the school, or is it the school that gets ready for the district, not for the student, really? And that whole shift, that whole mind shift around, you know, who's getting ready for who, and exactly what is the school's mission, which is what I think you're talking about, what's the school's mission, and what can we do to have allies that make that seamless for students and families. Part of the purpose of this activity was to unbridle ourselves from at least the first meeting that I went to. There really is no, there are no boundaries on this. There really isn't on the legislation or what our charge is. And one of the reasons that, even though that's 10 years old, Ken's presentation, even though it's still the #1 viewed TED viewing with millions of kids, is that at the core of it is, let's design something that works for all kids. And let's not be inhibited by the way we are right now. This is a chance for us, this commission, to come forward with recommendations that could fundamentally change the way we approach schools. If it is poverty, if it is the way that we approach prenatal through 5, if it is apprenticeships and other types of models, you know, at the lower grades or at middle grades, if it is the community college system working differently with, or expanding the way that they work with schools, if it is the university system being aware of the types of leaders and teachers that are required to be successful in the society that we live in now. We don't have you can't talk about money, you can't talk about special education, you can't talk about, there's nothing on the list. I've researched it. There isn't anything. And I wish I had a wand many days. Today I wish I had a wand too, and I wish that we could just kind of spray the dust over us that would say, okay, we're not going to be inhibited by that didn't work, or we would never be able to do that. There's all kinds of activities we can do that could have go through a process that will take more time, take more hours, etc. I will pull and make sure that that's okay. We're missing some members today because I wasn't able to come off from that first meeting that I chaired quickly enough. Because people around the table have lives, and so I want to make sure that we have the dates in place so that people can make it that are on the commission and others. But we really are not inhibited. And if anybody wants to challenge that, please, let's talk about it right now. Tell me what we can't talk about, or tell me what we can't come up with a recommendation. Now's our chance. And I know the politics are live. I know there's a live situation. But I am committed to taking advantage of the legislation and moving forward as smartly and as Maine-like as we can, possibly to make things better for kids. Anybody want to challenge the notion that we are unlimited? Challenge is too hard of a word. Anybody want to talk about it? See the eyebrows up? See that? It's inviting. So if anybody wants to do that, let's do it either now or a little bit later at another meeting. Susan Boatman is the special assistant to the deputy commissioner. Do people need to stretch? I don't want everybody leaving at once. So Susan, people need to stretch. Okay, Susan, thank you for coming today. Thank you for putting this material together. Have you I think Tyler passed out things that you want to put out. There's others, okay.
And I don't need this, I've got the classroom voice very clearly, so. A while back, we presented some expenditure data, and I wanted to be clear what this expenditure data is. This expenditure data is what the school districts are spending. It does not include what the state may directly spend for children in schools. So this is a snapshot of a 10-year period, which we actually identified 2 areas which have increased dramatically. One is special education, and the other is student and staff support. And you can see in your handout, I kind of gave you a definition of student and staff support, what's included in there.
Susan, may I say to the commission that there are a couple members on the commission that specifically have asked for information, financial information, so that they can think about what it is that they want to know more about. And is it okay if they ask questions?
Oh yes, ask questions as we're going along, that's fine. So if you know, especially if you have a question of what something means.
Thank you.
Is the spending data from 2004, 2005, is it adjusted for inflation at all?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm not that good. I'm not a statistician, so you're going to get the raw data here. However, it shows a dramatic increase in spending in this 10-year period, even without that inflation. 46% in special education, which has brought it up to over $350 million that we're spending on special education, and that does not include another $30 million that we spend on state boards and state clients. So, the other area is student staff support, which is a huge combining of a bunch of different things. Includes guidance and help and instructional technology, improvement instruction, professional development, library, student assessment. So you can see that's quite a catch-all category. But I'm going to go down, in 2004-05, we didn't collect the detailed data that we do now. So unfortunately, I can't unpack those for that 10 years ago. So what we did is we looked at the last 5 years, and you can see on the next page, special education. And we broke it down into different types of special education costs. The regular classroom, this is services that kids get, special ed services that kids inside the regular classroom. Resource room, self-contained, your self-contained classroom, kids are in there 100% of their day. Hospital homebound, related services, all your OT, PT, psychological services, all the related additional support services that children might need. summer school, after school, tuition and board, that's for your out-of-district placement. And these are the district's out-of-district placement. It could be into another district, into a private school, or even out of state. So, and then special ed administration, that's your special ed administration office. And it will include also legal fees for special education, so that's in there. You're gonna find that a couple areas kind of pop out. One is your self-contained classroom has grown about 26%, or almost $18 million in this 5-year period. Related services also has grown around 14 million. Tuition and board has gone up about 6 million in that 5-year period. But overall, in that 5-year period, special education costs have gone up $64 million in a 5-year period. Why? It's a good question. I don't know. So this is a little beyond my capability. However, I did take a look at the kinds of disabilities we had. We have a next page, and I'm going to say ignore the bottom 2 lines. I think there's a problem with them. So, but I do know that we have 2 categories where disabilities have increased. One is autism and other health impairment. At the same period of time, we've had maybe a slight change in the number of special ed kids we have had overall. So the question is, are these categories causing higher costs? Are the children's identifications requiring more services? So that's one of the things I might be some of the reasons why special ed is getting more expensive. Another thing that's happening is what's called the federal requirement for maintenance of effort. In order to receive their federal funds for special education, a district must maintain their expenditures, their state and local expenditures. So if they spend as much as they did the prior year, they still qualify for their federal funding. If they do not, they can lose their federal funding. So that makes it a little hard if you always have to spend as much as you did the year before. Reason the feds do that is to prevent what's called supplanting. They don't want their federal dollars paying for things that our state and local dollars have been paying for all along. So that's one of the major reasons. Another reason is to make sure that we're providing services.
So one of the, I'm sure it's an unintended consequence, is that you don't get creative. You don't try to do things that are better for students, and better for students and parents and guardians, and also helpful to teachers, that may save money. You don't do it because of this particular situation that you have to follow. It is counterintuitive to what a state like Maine's interest is.
And there are very few areas you can get a waiver for not maintaining that. And I had listed some of them there. This is federal regulation, so it's a little hard. It's basically, if you retired a higher paid staff and brought in younger staff, that would be a reason. If your number of special ed kids went down, that would be a reason why your cost may have gone down. They had a costly expenditure. A good example of that would be if you had a high cost out of district student, you brought them back in district, or the child either moved out of state or aged out, or a number of different reasons. Another instance is a child no longer needs special ed services. So they've left the special ed services area because they don't need those services any longer. There's also another little area is if the state takes over a piece of those costs, and then that district would have that reason for not spending as much. So that's another area. But then the state has to maintain. So we also have a statewide maintenance of effort that are required to do for special ed in order to get the federal funding. So we just wanted you to be aware of that. Like you said, this is counterintuitive. So that this is what the district is working against, is that they got to maintain those expenditures, or else lose their federal funding, which runs about almost $50 million in federal funding for this state for special education. Second area is student and staff support. And you see that was a huge increase in the last 10 years, 73%. This shows only the 5-year period, and for that 5-year period altogether, it's only 15%. But there are a couple things that stick out. Instructional technology. Well, think about what you had 10 years ago. You probably didn't have instructional technology 10 years ago. And even the 5 years has gone up $13 million. Another area is improving instruction. That's not professional development for the individual teacher. It is your curriculum development, your planning, it also includes things like literacy specialists, teacher mentors, teacher certification committees. So think about what the demands on schools are today as compared to 5 years ago or 10 years ago. It's different. So those costs have gone up. So I wanted you to give aware of that. There are a few other areas here, but they're sometimes they're so small, the changes, and might be a big percentage, but it's not as big an amount. So again, in that 5-year period, that went up $28 million. So.
If anyone has any questions about any of the jargon or any of the terms, please don't hesitate. If you don't want to ask, you just can send me a note and I'll ask it for you. Let me try that again. For you, not you. Sorry about that.
If we go to the next graph, this is kind of scary. This is the per pupil expenditures. That's the blue bar lines, and you can see how they climbed over the years. And the red line shows our decline in student population. We've lost a significant amount of students in the last 10 years. Probably we've lost 23,000 students in 10 years. We've lost 34,000 in 15 years. So, and yet, okay, so yeah, you have the same expenditures when you lose kids. Of course, that cost is going to be up per pupil. So you have a combination of things happening here. You have expenditures being spread over fewer kids, but you still have a growth in expenditures happening too. So that has grown. So this kind of exasperates what that looks like because of decline in enrollment. So. But you also can see there was a flat area between 2008-09 through 2011-12. That's when we did the reorganization. We had quite a few fewer districts, and 11-12 is when we repealed the penalties and started seeing withdrawals. So, and the withdrawals from districts have not only affected the new school district, the RSUs, they have affected the old districts that were formed in the 60s and the 70s. So you're going to see, you see that happening too.
Rebecca?
What was the recession?
2008.
That's another common reason why that held out down expenditures, because we were affecting the recession in 2006, I think it started. So 2008.
Right.
So we have a combination of
Same
things.
point, yeah.
I will tell you, when looking at governance structure, the RSUs and the old SADs cost per student is lower than a single municipality and CSDs. I kind of discount CSDs because we only have a small number of them, so they're difficult to do trends on. But withdrawals are not helping the cost per student. Every time a district withdraws from another district, you're creating another administration, another set of staff that's needed. Often when we're doing a withdrawal, some of the districts some of the staff will stay with the old districts, but then the new district has to replace those staff because they still need those services for their kids. So you have more duplication of services. So. And I think some of the withdrawals are happening. What we're hearing is that the districts, when they withdraw in district, we've had a few say, if I know it was going to cost so much, I might have not done it. So.
How many schools have withdrawn?
I don't have that off the top of my head, I'm sorry.
Roughly 5, 10, 20?
Probably 20. And that's a combination of ones that don't operate schools, less than the ones that operate schools. That's a little more difficult. The ones that don't operate schools, so they tuition to everybody, they tuition their kids out. That tends to be more common.
So I'm sorry, if I could just have a follow-up. So if they don't operate schools, then that probably doesn't address the whole administrative cost issue, correct?
They still have to have an administration. So again, you're creating either at least a part-time superintendent and other costs that's over and above the cost they left, because that cost doesn't go away in the old district unless they cut staff. So you're adding staff. Every time you have a draw, especially if you have a school, you're adding staff.
Susan, I wanna go back to the second slide where you talked about the increase in special education and student staff support.
Yeah.
You didn't talk about why the sudden decrease in administrative costs.
Okay,
Touch on that.
I think people have been very cognizant about their expenditures in system administration. Okay. However, while it's been going down in this state, as compared to ourselves,
Yep.
we still rank 5th in the nation on system administration.
Thanks. So to go back to the consolidation, my community last year, Raymond and Wyndham, we looked at leaving and we came to that conclusion. Awesome process. I would say everybody in the committee except maybe one person wanted to split.
Yeah.
And looking at the facts and using numbers and all, made the decision it would be too expensive, didn't make sense. But I would make so we voted not so. But I would make the point, your point is that, so when they split, it costs more money. I'd make the point, if we went back the other way, if Raymond hadn't been forced to consolidate, we probably could have done our thing, but because we had to consolidate, it cost us a lot of money. So it kind of goes both ways.
It does go both ways, and
Yeah.
there's other reasons why people split too. One of the reasons is they want to keep their school open.
Yeah.
But I can almost promise you, down the road,
That's why we were looking at it.
yeah,
Yeah.
I will promise you, down the road, I have seen this time and time again, that school ends up getting closed anyways, because then the withdrawn districts just can't afford it. Can't keep it operating. So, just one, I gave you a table with some of the expenditures and costs and the kid counts, just so you could see from year to year what was happening. As you can see, we did have a significant decline. I gave you 15-16 in this past year of 1.3%, so that's a little more than we've had in previous years. I still see us losing 2,000 kids a year for a while. At one point in time, this state had over 250,000 students that were publicly funded. So think about Portland, with 7,000 students right now. They had 13,000 students at one time. So that's the magnitude that we're seeing in the loss of student populations. So, and we're up to $2.2 billion in schools expenditures. And then the next page just gives you a little bit more of the 10-year trend, which we see that actual expenditures are up 26%. The 15-year trend is 62%. But you gotta remember, education was very different 15 years ago. I mean, we have much more demands on schools at that point in time. In the last 10 years, general purpose aid, state subsidy went up 28%, local taxes went up 30%. So I was kind of pleased to see that we weren't too far off the effort for both sides, and the kids went down 11%. So, but you can see there was a big difference in the 15-year. State funding went up 51%, whereas local went up 75%.
Right.
Included in that percentage, Susan, does that also have the Maine State retirement shift?
No.
That does not?
No.
Okay, that's what that.
This is just the big chart that we provided before the next one, and I just wanted to make you aware that next one, that we also have about $170 million worth of federal funds we're spending on top of it. So mostly Title I, local entitlement, special ed, those are the two big pools, and a number of smaller federal grants and stuff. So finally, I'm going to have him switch to another graph. And this looks somewhat familiar. It's a little bit trimmed down. I pulled a bunch of stuff out of it. And what it is, it shows our local and state effort. And at the top, you'll see the orange bottom is the state. The reddish pink section is local. And you're going to see the white dots up above are the local expenditures. So these two, orange and red together, are basically 100% EPS. It's the school funding formula, the required local share and the state share. The white dots above are what the actual expenditures of state and local funds only. So districts have more than state and local funds in that, so. But you're gonna see, at a point, we got really close to 100% EPS with the state and local fundings in 2011-12. So, but now things are growing quite quickly. 13 was up 38 million, 14 is up 74 million, and 15 is up 73 million in the cost now. Whereas state and local has not climbed as dramatically required. So we're seeing a divergence there, and it's getting kind of scary because of how quickly those costs are moving up in the last few years. Sometime later this year, we'll have the expenditures for 16. That's just being collected now. So I'm anxious to see what that's going to do and how much that's going to increase or hopefully flatten out. I don't know. So.
Rebecca?
So, I don't know how many other commission members, or I should say commission members, I know a number on the Education Committee have lived with this graph, and have lived with the EPS formula and the allocation methodology. Is everyone really well versed in that?
I don't think they've had EPS 101 yet, so.
Is that coming today?
We can do that, yeah.
It's not, well, you can do some of it today. We also are gonna have somebody come who was unable to come today to do it for the commission. But if you wanna touch on it today.
Well, I can touch on it. The EPS formula was implemented in 2005-06. And so we've passed the 10-year mark on the EPS formula. And it was designed as a student equity formula. It's supposed to recognize the needs for each student when we're doing a total allocation. And it also recognizes for school districts if they have staff with higher seniority or higher education levels. It builds that in. So it's very refined to each individual school administrative unit when we do the total allocation. There are still some pieces that are expenditure driven in the formula. There's 3 areas: gifted and talented, career technical education or CTE, and debt service. Those 3 items are expenditure driven. So the rest of it is basically called a cost model that is necessary to meet the essential programs and services. So it's not intended to pay for everything, but it's supposedly to pay what's necessary to for kids to achieve the learning results. That was the original intent for it. So I think there's also a distribution factor, so that brings us down to a total allocation, and then we create what's a local and state share, and that's the distribution portion. And that's usually based on the wealth behind every child in the community. And one of the things that people don't understand is that they'll come to me and they'll say, but my kids didn't go down, and my valuation didn't go up, but I'm losing state subsidy. See, the formula looks at all 490 plus towns in there, and it's your relationship against all those different towns. So if other districts, other towns have gotten poorer in recognition of family, and you stay the same, they might have dropped below you and get more of the subsidy. So it's a misunderstanding of how you just can't look at a single unit in the formula. You have to look at all 490 towns.
We're gonna have a deeper EPS 101 at the next meeting. Person's available. Rebecca.
Thanks. And so I will try not to drill down into this too deeply, because everybody knows how much I love this conversation. But my question is, Susan, is that when you all of these figures that we're talking about in terms of cost of education, that's what's flowing through the EPS model, correct?
The cost of education is an allocation formula. It's not expenditures.
Right.
Okay, 2 different things.
Right, but what the state does is it through the EPS formula, based on student numbers and based on what it says is necessary for the education of our kids, that's what's defined for each district as to what they should be spending. Anything above that amount is a local decision that their committees and if there's a referendum process still in place, their citizens vote on. So the increases that we're seeing is a result of the EPS formula at work and any additional expenditures that are being agreed to locally. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
that, the white dot line, the difference between that and where the blue line ends is local decision to raise over and above what's required by the formula. So there are,
And so that formula is what's driving that blue line.
and we've excluded local and debt from that.
Right.
So there is actually more than that.
You're right.
I just wanna make sure I understand something. If I do the math and I don't do it well in my head, so, and I know you do it much better than I, Susan.
Not in
so
my head.
If I look at the total local required share, it appears to have gone up about $300 million. Is that about right?
From the
Roughly.
864 to the
From
74.
18,
That's the combined.
well, that's okay.
That is
So
what the next
combined
line
has
is
gone
down.
up- Well, the combine's gone up 300 million.
Yeah.
Required EPS. And the state share has gone up 46 million during the same period of time, is that correct?
This line, this middle line is your required.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
so
if I
you've
look
gone
at
from
the state-
864 to $1,007,000.
And the state share, though, starts at the 956.
Yeah.
And goes to the 1.002.
Yeah.
That's about 46 million.
Yeah.
So while the state share has gone up 46 million, the total cost has gone up 300 million. Therefore, I assume that the difference is the local share has gone up 100 and something million.
The good news is that more of it's inside the formula, so we equalize more for the districts. So that's one thing I have noticed, that there's less outside the formula, because we were pretty close in 12. So we're equalizing, so that helps the poorer districts.
Yeah, it's just that I hear often that the state has dramatically increased funding over the years, but what I'm really seeing is that it's the local taxpayer who's dramatically increasing the funding. Is that?
Yeah, we had, remember with the recession, we peaked down in 2011, you can see the 872.
Oh, I haven't forgotten that.
Yeah. So, if this graph went further, it would be really scary.
Yeah.
When I came into education many years ago, state share was 278 million. So yeah, both sides have gone up.
Yeah.
Significantly. And yet we've declined in student population dramatically. So we have a big question mark.
Thank you, that helps.
Any other questions? Susan? You got, is that?
That's it.
Okay.
For
Susan,
today.
thank you very much for preparing this and delivering it. All the above. Eric?
I would just make a comment on your point. But the background on the special ed payments and services requirements, this is sort of more of my background. I've been practicing law for 5 years. The federal government, both through the Americans with Disabilities Act and the ADAA and through the IDEA Act, has been providing extensive requirements to colleges and universities and to those public schools who receive federal funds of the obligations to which they're required in order to provide accommodations to those students who are qualified as being disabled in the meaning of the Act, which means that they have a substantial physical and emotional impairment that substantially affects a major life activity. As that regulatory scheme has come into place since the early 1990s, it has been joined by like regulatory schemes by each of the states. And here we have the Human Rights Commission, the Human Rights Act has adopted a state analog of that. And over the last 20 years, the important point, we all know that, but the important point is that the definition of the category of persons who are disabled within the meaning of those state and federal acts has expanded significantly. And in litigation, there's been significant tension between the definitions at the state level and the definitions at the federal level, while the federal courts have been relatively restricted in saying, in looking at expanding the categories. The state courts and the state regulatory schemes do not. The effect of that has been to have, really, the population probably hasn't changed. Those students have always had those conditions. What's different is that the law now recognizes those conditions as being protected within the meaning of the Act, which triggers the obligation of the institution to provide accommodations, and that triggers the expense. The reason I take the time to mention that is assuming all those numbers are accurate, it's a significant expense. Because it is driven in effect primarily by force of federal law and by coordinated state regulatory approaches, that's not a dynamic that's likely to change. And so it may be a significant cost item, but it's not one that I would view as really either negotiable or discretionary on behalf of the local authorities, and it's more an issue not of how does that cost change, but how is that cost absorbed relative to the other costs.
Thank you. So we're going to take a 15-minute break because we said we would. So you need to be back, ready to roll. We're going to have Dr. Betsy Webb explain her phenomenal work in Greater Bangor and Bangor specifically around regionalization activities in special ed. We were able to, at a late date, get Betsy to come, and I very much appreciate that. And so if we could be back at 11:05 specifically, so that we can get the full benefit of that. Thank you for those of you that need to leave now. Rick?
Just want to highlight that I realize with the crowd there could be a line. There's another set of bathrooms downstairs, so feel free.
Excellent plan.
I just wanted to make sure.
At least 1 minute. So 11:05.